Welcome to my channel. My name's Bissy and Armand's a liar. But, just before you click off, I've created videos for Louis and Lestat's lies. So I think it's only fair that Armand gets one too. So does Armand lie to himself? Well, I certainly believe that Armand deceives himself into believing that some of his actions are somewhat justified. But does Armand see himself as a liar or a manipulator? I don't think he does. Armand is a complicated character with a complicated and terrible past. He has conflicting emotions that run parallel with his singular motives, which sometimes lead to his cruel and very often abhorrent actions. Understanding Armand's past is and should be different to excusing his sometimes horrific deeds. So I've broken down Armand's biggest lies from seasons 1 and 2 of Interview with the Vampire for us to discuss. Now remember, this is show Armand I'm talking about. If you're enjoying my videos, please do consider subscribing and also joining my Clean Club, where you can suggest video topics and the shows and movies that I react to. I've got more on that later. But with that said, let's get into this video. I will not harm you. Armand's first words to Louis in the muted lamplight of that Parisian park were,
I will not. Please.
No. Please.
He said, I will not harm you.
And I never have.
And although he never physically harmed Louis, in the same way that Lestat did, Armand did harm Louis very deeply, and in so many ways. We'll get into a lot of the ways that Armand's lies in particular have harmed Louis. But for now, I just wanted to focus on the very first words from Armand to Louis being a lie. Armand may not have intended to hurt Louis initially, but he knew that the possibility that he would, and indeed could, hurt him, or even take him out, was ever present, due to his own apparent love, or should I call it adherence, for the ancient rules that govern the coven life. Santiago explains to Claudia that Armand is very strict when it comes to their rules, and is not very forgiving of those who break them. Louis and Claudia had not exhibited any form of adherence to any kind of vampiric law, Parisian or otherwise. Armand and the coven had stalked Louis and Claudia for 5 months before Armand approached him in that park. So he knew that there was the possibility of these unruly American vampires displeasing him. In those 5 months, Armand and his coven had become increasingly bothered by their apparent disregard for normal vampire etiquette. And Armand says to Daniel that he had to act now. I believe that this initial lie set the tone for the rest of their extremely turbulent relationship. They gave him a choice. He chose. After Louis witnesses and suffers Armand's betrayal in that saloon, after Louis, Claudia and Madeleine were beaten and tortured, after a show trial where Louis is brought face to face with Lestat, after the death of his daughter and fledgling in front of an entire audience, and after Louis' own imprisonment and subsequent rampage, Louis and Armand sit. They sit in Louis' flat and finally talk. Louis wants, and it seems like he expects, honesty from Armand now. They are finally confronting the countless lies that Armand has told Louis for a huge part of their relatively new relationship. Louis asks for what would be incredibly painful truths. At least they would be if Louis hadn't been driven into numb vacancy by this point. Armand seemed to finally be honest with Louis. Louis asks,
When did you start lying to me?
Louis also asks why Armand never gave him a chance and made a new plan with him.
Then once thick, and all that time, telling me, make a different plan with me.
Armand responds,
It's my coven of 200 years, or him. And at the time, I could not count on your love lasting as long.
in my opinion, savage. I could not prevent it. Yes, you bloody could, Armand. Armand knew what the coven were planning and said absolutely nothing to Louis. Armand knew the details of the plan and continued his relationship with Louis. They gave him a choice, he said. He chose. But he lies by omission the night he supposedly leaves the coven for Louis. by clearly indicating to his bags as though that choice was Louis. Rather than admitting that the coven were planning on taking him and Claudia out, he continues his relationship with Louis, getting closer in the wake of Claudia and Madeleine leaving, settling into a life with just the two of them, son, coven and family.
I wake up at night and the fans aren't trading insults. No one is forcing me to listen to their gossips or solve their petty crises. It's bliss.
All the while, Armand was directing the play that was intended to end Claudia, Madeleine and Louis. Patiently awaiting Claudia's return to Paris, he wrote in the margins of the script. He is face to face with Lestat, the star witness, and directing him on how to portray his story, and then going back to Louis as if their new life, again, sans coven and Claudia, was perfect. Armand says, "I could not prevent it." But sir, yes you could have. Yes, you could have. And I think you would have if you wanted to. But you didn't. Ouch. The seismic lie. So the vast majority of Louis and Armand's relationship is based on the seismic lie. There are other toxic foundations to their relationship too, but I'm going to try to stay focused on the subject of this video, so I won't be listing them all here. Armand takes credit for Lestat's work. Yes, he was able to perform the same gift as Lestat, but Armand chose not to. From his perspective, the play was going well. He directed it after all. But when the unfolding circumstances changed, Armand adapted and chose to lie to Louis and take credit for saving him. I mentioned this in a previous video, but it really does boggle my mind. Did Armand really think that he could tell this huge lie and never be found out? Is that the fundamental lie that he convinces himself of? I mean, they're immortal beings. It may not be this decade or even this century, but the possibility, well, almost the inevitability, exists that your lie will come to light. Or was he not thinking at all, just reacting? Armand does have a tendency to try to cover up his most horrific actions, out of shame, embarrassment, or pride. Or maybe it's the desire to have complete control over the narrative that surrounds him, no matter the cost. Even when Daniel presents Louis with the proof of this seismic lie in Season 2, Episode 8, Armand still continues to deny it, chasing after Louis and shouting,
One night, 17 years ago, you have forgiven me for what part I played in their death.
This was the lie that broke the camel's back. And what did Armand do in the aftermath? Well, he went after the one who exposed him. He turned Daniel. He did the thing that he said repulsed him. Back in Paris, Armand warned Louis of the pitfalls of turning another. And yet, in response to Daniel exposing him and Louis leaving him, Armand creates his first. Now, how does this action reframe Armand's decision to enter into a relationship and stay in that relationship with Louis for close to a century after Lestat left him? Let me know your thoughts. Did Armand ever stop lying to Daniel? Armand cuts pages out of Claudia's diaries in an attempt to cover up his part in Paris. His one act of cowardice, he calls it. Granted, he didn't want to be part of this interview. He didn't want Louis to be doing this at all. But he did agree to participate. However, he cut those pages out before showing them to Daniel, before he joined the interview, whilst he was still masquerading as Rashid. Armand says,
The pages I tore out of Claudia's diaries, we did most of those together.
I call that deflection. He then went on to say,
The ones I did on my own were to protect me from you. Why did I owe you my one act of cowardice?
which is fair. But like I said, he decided to participate in this interview. It was even his idea to participate, that is. Was this another attempt at control that just went horribly wrong? Or is Armand just unable to help himself? Now, I'm not going to get into Armand's version of his time with Lestat because it hasn't been proven yet that that's a lie. But I have a sneaky suspicion that Season 3, The Vampire Lestat, is absolutely going to prove Armand's version as not quite the truth. Armand knew that Lestat was in Paris. I mean, I touched on this earlier, but I feel like I really need to highlight it here. Whilst he was vying for Louis's affections and attention, Armand knew that the coven had contacted Lestat long before the trial. Outside of Claudia, Armand is probably the only person to know exactly what Lestat meant to Louis and the complex mix of feelings around him. In season 2, Armand and Louis discussed the wake of emotions they both found themselves in post-Lestat. Louis didn't know Lestat was alive, but Armand did. He not only knew that Lestat was alive, but he knew that he was there, in Paris, in the theatre. This is a particularly cruel lie, as the motive is just so murky to me. He wanted Claudia gone, that's a given. But he didn't fight tooth and nail to save Louis. And he was okay enough for Lestat to be the star in the spectacle that would end in the destruction of Claudia and Madeleine. I preserve your happiness, even when you can't. Armand drummed this line into Louis's mind following the mind wipe in 1973. And although Armand did suffer some very terrible verbal abuse from Louis, I mean, that fight was terrible, I have to wonder, is this a new stance that Armand's adopted post-Paris? Because in Paris, Claudia was Louis's happiness. She had been for the entirety of their time together. Yes, Lestat was Louis's love, but Claudia was his happiness. Lestat knew that to keep Louis happy, he would need to keep Claudia close. But Armand wanted Claudia gone. He ensures Claudia's unhappiness as baby Lulu. He threatens her in the streets. And ultimately, he was instrumental in her demise. Armand did the opposite of preserving Louis's happiness here. And nearly 80 years later, he still cannot see why Louis hasn't moved on from that. It was one night 70 years ago. You've forgiven me, Louis. And speaking of the mind wipe, when exactly, if ever, was Armand planning on telling Louis about this? Now, I don't think he was ever going to do it. And again, I'm not going to get into whether Armand lied about Louis asking him to do this. I've got my own thoughts, but the show hasn't told us either way. So I'm going to keep quiet on that for now. Oh, the poor original Paris coven. Armand stalked Lestat for a long time prior to their first meeting. Similarly to Louis, Lestat didn't know vampire etiquette. He didn't know that other vampires existed. Despite this, Armand resented him and the way he lived, while simultaneously envying him and his freedom. Armand was sadly forced into coven leadership in horrific circumstances. No one can take that away from him, and no one is trying to either. But he did take to it and led without mercy. Remember, I'm speaking of show Armand here. Armand managed and steered a situation which would result in Lestat disrupting this centuries-old coven. Lestat's revelations led to the ultimate destruction of many of its members and drove the majority of the rest mad. All of this Armand exchanged to be free of them, to be free of the role he fairly resented, but at the cost of his members who followed him and his every command, and ultimately to end up right back in the position of leadership that he tried to get away from. Now, I understand that as a result of abuse, you may end up repeating cycles. I do understand that. But I do not think that having a reason behind your actions excuses really, really cruel or poor actions that inflict really harmful things on other people. That, again, this is just my opinion. The Coven of the 40s. The number of lies Armand tells to his reimagined coven in the 40s era are too many to list. But the highlights that stand out for me are: Armand commits to taking Louis out in the sewer after his conversation with Santiago, but I don't believe that Armand had any intention of finishing Louis down there. The route they took through the sewers led directly to Louis's flat. I think Armand knew all along what he wanted to do and exactly what he would not be doing, regardless of the coven's consensus. I think Armand wanted to engineer a situation where he could present as the forgiving, benevolent opposite to Lestat in front of Louis, and the coven gave him that opportunity. The second highlight for me is, of course, he kept Louis and Claudia's secret from the coven. Was this to protect these newcomers? Was it to show willing to Louis in his pursuit of his affections? Or was it just another loaded weapon in his arsenal, waiting to go off whenever needed, i.e., throwing it in Claudia's face? I think it's the latter. But what do you think? Have I missed any of Armand's other seismic lies? If I have, let me know in the comments. I cannot wait to hear your thoughts. If you've enjoyed this, please do like this video and subscribe for more weekly videos on Interview with the Vampire. I'm also reacting to Heated Rivalry, so do check that out too. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, bye!